Good morning. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada. Today is Wednesday, December the 28th, 2022. And I am basically continuing my tour around the world, speaking with financial planners around the world who specialize in all of the U.S. place of birth induced problems worldwide. And today is actually the second time I've spoken with Aaron Katzman. He did a podcast with me a couple of years ago. So we're in reverse today, but today I'm speaking with Aaron Katzman, who is in Jerusalem, Israel, and runs a company called Lighthouse Financial. Have I got all that right so far, Aaron?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Excellent. Anyway, thanks very much for connecting with me today. I'm really looking forward to this. I've seen some of your videos, and I can see that you are absolutely 100% engaged in this, both professionally, financially, emotionally, all that great stuff. But it's always interesting to begin with, how in the world did you, A, end up in Israel, and B, end up in the financial planning business?
I like to say I lost a bet. And that's how I ended up in Israel. But no, I actually, it's more based on sort of, I would say religious grounds or nationalistic grounds. Being Jewish, I felt that sort of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, and I want to be part of sort of creating a new history, the revival of sort of the Jewish people in their homeland. And I felt that I had an obligation to be part of that. So that's why I came. It's far from, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, which is, it's 10,000 miles and 20,000 miles of culture different than it is in Israel. But so far, so 30 years later, I'm still here to speak about it. And then I got into financial planning. From a young age, I was always interested in financial markets and investing. And I'm sort of self-taught, but I read a lot, and I followed the newspaper and followed.
Is there really any other way than being self-taught with this stuff?
That's a good question. I think you have to do it yourself. You can be in a company or whatever, but ultimately it's you and the client, and that's the only way you learn. Sometimes you learn the hard way, but you have to be self-taught. I would agree with that. So
I don't think there's a real easy way to learn much of anything that matters in this world. If it were easy, then there wouldn't be all these people who don't know stuff, right? So
that's for sure, especially when it comes to money.
yeah, that is an incredible problem. And since you raised that, why don't we start there? Because what I'm just finding it fascinating, talking to you, to the group of people, which you are one, or financial planners helping American citizens abroad. But, the first thing that I'd like to get your take on is, you would agree that this is something people have trouble with, right? Getting started, focusing on all that stuff, or not?
Yeah, you don't have to be an American abroad. Anybody has trouble, I think, with money and getting started and investing. I mean, that's why you see that, the average size of savings is, if Americans in their 50s is laughable. Debt, it's a real problem, and debt is running rampant. When you just whip out your plastic card, and you get points at, at a hotel of your choice, in order to, and you put it on a 3-month payment plan, it's just a recipe for disaster, right? You have a whole industry pushing bad financial habits, and they're winning. Unfortunately, I find that they're winning. It's sad,
they're
but they're
annihilating. It's not even close. It's absolute annihilation. And it may be because, you talk about the putting stuff on cards and stuff. I mean, I once heard it said that people will pay anything for something free.
Right. That's well said.
Yeah. When it's pretty obvious, this stuff is, is basically harmful. Like these damn credit cards, they're harmful to people who use them. They're harmful to merchants. They're basically, who are just the banks who issue them. That's it.
That's why you go from high rise to high rise, and the name, the high rises are named after the banks and the credit card companies.
Oh, don't forget the lawyers and tax compliance firms.
But there's a big industry. There are a lot of people making a lot of money because of other people's financial mismanagement. Let's just leave it at that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. So, what's the psychology here? Seriously, I'm trying to figure this out. I mean, it is so obvious. I mean, I have sort of one foot in this century and one in the last century. In other words, I remember a time, you probably do too, when basically there was an expectation of pensions, and people worked and retired, this sort of stuff. And that's like just so far gone, right? I mean, it's just so last century. So, I mean, you would agree with me that people have an absolute personal, social, familial obligation to worry about this stuff. Would you agree?
I think so.
And they don't. So what's the psychology here? Why is it so hard for them?
I think that we're living in the remote controlled generation, and people aren't able to focus, and they want everything is instant, and that includes gratification. And if they can buy something today and be gratified and have a quick emotional high from whatever it is they're purchasing, so they're going to do it. And the heck with what's going to be in 5 or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or when I'm retired. Who cares, right? We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But today I want to be happy. So I'm going to buy, a fancy car, or I'm going to buy a boat, or whatever people buy, right?
Pause there on the fancy car. Let me tell you what I think about that. I once had this idea that anybody could generate a, retirement nest egg by basically doing two things. The first is never buy a new car. And the second is just avoid debt. Would you agree with that? I mean, the car thing is simply unbelievable. A friend of mine, this just blew my mind, okay, last week, paid $80,000 for a new vehicle. 80,000 bucks. Okay. I mean, here I am driving my 15-year-old Hyundai Ride. It's worth maybe, I don't know, 3,000 bucks. And I'm looking at this and I thought, what's 80 divided by 3? I mean, you could buy 26 of my cars, for this. And I thought, as far as I can tell, my car started today. I mean,
right.
What gives here? I mean, that's incredible stuff, isn't it?
And ultimately, the point of the car is to get you from point A to point B and get you there safely. And, I don't understand. I've never been a big car person myself, but whatever it is that floats your boat, right? You still have to be responsible. And unfortunately, people aren't, and they just want it. And, again, if you can put it on a payment plan, then you don't have to pay the piper at the end of the day. You can just sort of push it off and push it off and push it off. But they don't realize that the car and the boat and the TV and the iPhone, it all adds up. And at the end of the day, you don't have money for anything, and you can't get out of the payments, and it's a black hole. You keep circling down and circling, it sucks you in, and you can't get out of it. I see that a lot. I actually volunteer for an organization here. I'm on the board now, but I volunteered for an organization that worked with people who were in debt to help them get them out of debt. And, I've met hundreds over the years. I've worked with hundreds of families, and it's the same thing. It's over and over again. It's just the same story, how they got into debt. Oftentimes you'll find young couples who sort of wanted the same lifestyle their parents had, but they didn't realize that their parents worked 30 years to get that lifestyle, and they wanted it, the day they were married. They went out and they furnished the home with the most expensive furnishings, and they bought a fancy car, and, within 6 months they had $50,000 of debt, and they had no way of getting out of it. And you just see it over and over and over again.
Yeah. An observation or a thought I have on this, and I'd like to get your response, is that a lot of people, particularly the younger generation, they think in terms of can they make payments. They don't think in terms of how much something costs, right? And so I look at this, and I don't know what the real estate market has been doing in Jerusalem the last decade or so, but in Toronto, it's just been over the top if you read The Economist. And I watch these prices, go to the point where no sane person would do this, right? But because the interest rates are low, the way they view it is, well, I can make the payment sort of thing. I mean, do you find that with people that they're more, can I make the payment focus as opposed to, is it a good use of money or what does it cost?
100%. That's how everybody here looks at it. When you're buying, that nobody thinks about. The only question is, can I make the payment, or how much of a mortgage can I take that I can sort of still make the payment?
So
That's
isn't,
the
I mean,
way
isn't
that
that
everybody
just
looks
a
at it.
recipe towards never getting ahead financially? I mean, unless your view is, the house you just overpaid by 25%, is going to continue going up, right?
Well, here it's a little bit different. There are different dynamics at play, sort of in the Israeli real estate market in Jerusalem in particular. There's a real sort of supply and demand mismatch, huge demand, not a lot of new building. So, but even that works its way, it works out at the end. And at some point, prices get so ridiculous that nobody's going to buy and the market sort of freezes up. But it's still the same thing. It comes back to the buyers are all, what's it going to cost me a month? Nobody calculates, well, how much it's going to cost me over the next 25 years, right? They calculate what's it going to cost me in a month. And now interest rates are moving higher. So that sort of blew up. And, it's unfortunate that people don't look ahead and understand the ramifications of their decisions on their financial future, but nobody thinks about their financial future.
So I've got to ask you this, Aaron. So here you are, 25 years, you tell me, into your career as a financial planner. And the way you're talking, there are no people out there to use your services.
Well, maybe maybe we're exaggerating a bit, but if you're talking about the overwhelming, the majority of the population, or a good percentage of them, I don't know the statistics, but there are a lot of people out there who are not, who could be way better off financially, if they just took a few simple steps and they thought about things a little bit. There are always people out there who follow the book.
All right,
it's not complicated.
Let's outline some of these simple steps, things that any moron can do.
Live within your means.
Okay.
That's about as moronic. That's pretty much it, right?
That's too hard for the average mind to comprehend, right?
If you spend less or equal to what you bring in, you will be in a lot better shape than if you spend a lot more than you bring in. That's pretty much rule number one.
And it's also the hardest for people to follow.
For sure.
Because it doesn't apply to them. It applies to everybody else, but not to them somehow.
It applies to everybody else, but you have this whole machine, right? You have this whole machine, this consumer machine that's pulling you in the opposite direction. And I understand, right? For some people, if you didn't get an education about it, you never grew up with it, you never got the right messaging, it's overwhelming, right? And buy and 0% payment plans and all those kinds of things. It's overwhelming for most people if they, and to try and stand up against that takes a certain sort of internal fortitude almost, and a lot of people can't do it.
Almost like beating a drinking problem, isn't it? That's not a bad analogy. Maybe instead of AA, they should have Spending Anonymous or something like
that. Well, they
that.
have Debtors Anonymous. There is Debtors Anonymous for sure. It's big, and it's based on the rules to get out are very similar to like AA's rules. It's the same, the 10 steps or whatever. It's very, very, very similar to AA, but there is Debtors Anonymous for sure.
All right, so step number one is, live within your means. I like that because I can understand it. My view of the world is that if it's not simple, it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you hear time and time again, somebody like Charlie Munger talk, or, these kinds of people, right? I say, well, all you have to do is just buy a basket of stocks in U.S. companies, wait 30 years, and, no matter what, you're going to end up with, how about you say, a lot more than you started with, right? In other words, sure. It seems to me that, I've made so many mistakes in my own life that I don't think perfection is the issue. I think it's just, moving in the right direction consistently, right? But it's so much easier to move in the right direction, than it is to do all this other stuff anyway, right? But still people won't do it.
And I think what you said was spot on, right? It's very much sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We all make mistakes. And if there's even the financial planners that you're interviewing, if they don't say that they make mistakes, they're not telling the truth. I make mistakes. You want to you want to limit the amount of mistakes, but on a professional and individual, individual finances, we all make mistakes. But like you say, you have to go forward.
Yeah, there's a difference between moving in the right direction and not stumbling. I mean, everybody
100%.
stumbles, but you need to keep stumbling in the right direction. All right. So the first problem is live within your means. What's the second thing?
Well, I would, you can either say a 1A or call it number 2 is, no debt, with the exception of a mortgage. Debt is bad because you're paying them instead of, putting money away for yourself. It's pretty much
Right.
those that I understand there are times, right? There are emergencies that happen and, bad things happen. And sometimes there's no choice, but for 98% of the cases, there's no reason for people other than a mortgage to have any kind of consumer debt. There's really no
mortgage
reason.
is investing in, it's borrowing money to at least buy an asset, right?
Right. It's a lousy investment, but at least you're heading in the right direction, as you say.
Yeah, but
right? You at the end of the day end up with a home.
Yeah, I mean, with a car, I mean, it's totally insane. It depreciates every day.
Depreciating asset, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so no debt. Good, I like that. Next.
To invest, start to save. That's where the magic happens.
All right. How do people save? Because there's this whole mentality, well, I don't make any money. I don't have any money. How can I save? And what do you say to them, Aaron?
You can, you don't have to start off. You don't start off, nobody starts off wealthy. You start off just like when you learn to walk or you learn to read, right? You learn to walk, the baby gets up on its feet and falls and gets up and falls, but then starts one step after the other. And then, a couple of years later, they know how to run. And 10 years later, they can run a marathon or a half marathon, right? It's a process, and investing is a process. You start small. If you're employed and you're getting, 401k, you're getting matching, grab it, right? If you can open up an IRA, grab it and start putting money in even every month, or just in a regular taxable account. If you can put away $50 a month, $100 a month, whatever it is. Obviously, in the financial planning world, we have our 10 to 15%, of your income to save, right? But even if you can't do that at the beginning, save something and start, like we said, get yourself headed in the right direction. And the younger you do it, the better off you're going to be. I mean, there's all kinds of data, and people can look online. There are all these, they call them compound interest calculators. And if you just want to have fun, you can just put in all the data. You can put in how old you are, when you want to retire, putting $50 a month away, at what percentage interest rate, and you click on the enter, and it tells you by the age of 65, you're going to have $800,000 in the bank, or you're going to have $1.5 million in the bank. And it's not because you started with $250,000, and it's not because you put away chunks of $50,000 at a time. It's just by putting away $100, $200, whatever it is, it adds up and it compounds. And at the end of the day, you have real substantial worth at the end of the day. And there's nothing, it's not complicated. It's really not complicated, and it's not for the privileged.
Anybody can do it, but few people do it.
It's shocking. It shocks me.
Well, you put it that way, it's shocking. I mean, this is great. I'm getting a combination of a lesson, reminder. I mean, I think you need to hit the road. Okay.
I'll tell you, I'll put it for you sort of easier than that. I have this thing because, I'm pretty good employer. I provide coffee. Have coffee for my employees, and it kills me when they go outside and they go to a cafe and they buy coffee. It kills me because 3 coffees a week, if they just put that money into an exchange traded fund, or put that money into a stock or whatever, at the end of the day, there's over years, you're talking about tens and tens of thousands of dollars that people are spending when they have it right in front of them. They get free coffee. Right? Why spend money? Again, I don't have anything against Starbucks, right? If you want to go enjoy something, if you're getting it, if somebody's giving it to you for free, why spend money on it? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And you can just
because it's free. Sure, give it to them at a discount.
Give it to a discount.
You'll probably be better off. All right.
Charge them for it. Charge them for the
next. I mean, continuing on here. What next?
So we've spoken about,
About staying
um,
in shape. What you're really talking about is a training program. It's analogous to an exercise, but how do you keep it up? How do you stay in shape?
right, you have to keep, you keep doing it, and every now and then you go to the doctor and you get a physical, right? That's that's analogous to sort of reviewing your financial, not just your portfolio, but your financial situation. You don't have to do it every week, right? But you can do it once a year, twice a year, just to make sure, again, that you're headed in the right direction. Again, am I spending, you want to budget, obviously we forgot about that, but that's part of living within your means. Sort of goes without saying that the way to live within your means is to know where your money is going, right? And to allocate your dollars to your lifestyle, but make sure at the end of the day that you have a little bit left, right? Or put in one of the line items in your budget, savings, right? That should be number one. Mortgage, and then savings, and then utilities, and then food and gym and internet, whatever. It's just part of the budget. But check yourself. Just you go to a doctor once a year. You can go to a financial advisor, or you can sit down and with a pen and paper and just do it yourself. And if you need help, so you can go to a professional. But again, it's not that complicated. Make sure that you're headed in the right direction. Make sure that you're saving ultimately 10% of your income, whether it's in a retirement plan offered by your employer, or if you're doing it on your own. Just make sure that you do those steps. And at the end of the day, and you're gonna have bad years like this year, you're gonna take a net worth, so to speak, step backward. Markets drop. Okay, markets drop. Nothing goes up in a straight line, but over time, trust the process, because the process, as you said earlier, right, the process works. And over 10, 20, 30 years, the process has proved itself over every single time period to be successful. And that's the way to grow wealth and have comfortable and be secure and comfortable down the road.
Well, you keep this theme of moving in the right direction. Then I think about the name of your company, Lighthouse Financial, right? It makes perfect sense. I mean, you're the lighthouse, sort of, keeping them moving in the right direction, I guess, which is actually a great name. So how many years ago did you found Lighthouse Financial?
So I started actually when the lighthouse was needed. I started in the middle of the financial crisis. I started my business at the beginning of 2009. So the end of 2008, Lehman Brothers blew up, and the world was teetering on the end of the financial system. And that's where nothing like opening up, right, a financial company right in the middle of a financial storm. But
no, that would be the best time of all.
Correct. That's the best time at all. And it just goes to show, just like in terms of business for individuals, right? Don't get scared off just because, things are bad for a short period of time, because ultimately, again, the process works, and trust it. And the same thing with a business.
All right. So, of course, what got us connected a couple of years ago, although I really am enjoying listening to your perceptions of this stuff, probably because I agree with most of them and you're articulating them really, really well. We're kindred.
That always helps.
We're kindred spirits on this. But what brought us together a couple of years ago were these U.S. place of birth induced kinds of problems. So you're an American, you're a dual citizen, presumably, right? Living in Jerusalem, and I would think that would give you special insights into the problems of U.S. citizenship and financial planning, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I've set you up. What do you have to say about that, Aaron?
So it's the landscape for Americans who live abroad when it comes to their finances, whether they're retired or they're not retired, is very, very complicated. There are all kinds of issues out there that the Americans have created that make banking in a foreign country complicated. They make investing complicated. There can sometimes be double taxation issues. I don't want to get into the taxation too much because I'm a financial advisor. I'm not an accountant, but those issues are very, very important. And it's important for people to keep in mind, because more and more Americans are retiring abroad. Obviously, giving up citizenship is another issue, but as more and more Americans move abroad, they need to sort of be aware of the issues that are out there. And it's not, it's not financial planning if you're living in Peoria. It's a completely different landscape, and it even affects, I'm a branch of an American brokerage firm. So I open up accounts in the States, but even with that, and that we're one of the firms who can work with expat Americans. There are a lot of big US brokers who won't deal with Americans who live abroad. Most of the big boys won't deal with you anymore. We're able to do so, but even in terms of certain types of investments, they might be off limits for you. Even in the US, they're off limits. Now, if you want to start, let's say you're working, let's say in Israel, we'll just speak about my jurisdiction. If you're working in Israel, if you're an employee, there's certain, and you want to save money, there's certain investments which are sort of prohibitively off limits. They're not legally off limits, but they're what are called, and I don't want to get into the minutia, but what's called a PFIC. And that really limits what an American who lives abroad can invest in their home country. You can't invest in mutual
Generally,
funds
those would be thought of as non-US mutual funds or ETFs, right?
or ETFs. Exactly what I was going to say. You're only able to invest in you're allowed to, right? It's not a legal problem. It's a prohibitively high taxation problem that makes it pretty much off limits. And you have to, the only way you can sort of invest in foreign countries is by investing in individual securities. And I know here for a lot of Americans who've moved to Israel, they don't speak the language. They don't follow the local companies. It's foreign for them. They're living in a foreign country, but they don't know all the ins and outs of the stock markets or whatever. So it makes it very, very complicated to try and invest. And there are even certain company sponsored, they're not pension plans, they're investment plans, which certain accountants would say are sort of off limits for Americans. And that's a perk that you get, right? So it makes it very difficult to invest. And even a lot of the banks here don't want to work with Americans. They just forget it, right? They've been burned already, and they don't want to deal with the US authorities, and they just said, forget it. We're just not, even if you want to open up just a regular bank account for deposits and to get your salary in, right? And to go shopping with, they won't work with you. So it's a really, really tough field to navigate for Americans who live abroad.
Well, I would think, though, that creates a special need for the kind of expertise you have, both professionally and, shall I say, background-wise or socially or whatever, because of the dual citizenship. I mean, anybody who knows anything about this knows that you're 100% correct on this, at least 100% correct. I mean, I think it just varies sort of from country to country. But how do you approach solving these problems for, so you have a US citizen sitting in front of you who says, I am committed to saving, I am committed to investing, I am committed to all the principles. I heard this podcast you did with this John Richardson guy, and I agree with all of it, everything you said. How do you help somebody like that, though, that starts off with that kind of disability?
Right. So I think that you sort of hit it off with things who wants to start, right? If you're sort of well off financially, and you have assets, then there's solutions, right? There are companies that will work with you who will craft specific portfolios for you to avoid the PFIC issues. But let's say you're the mass affluent or you're starting out. That's where it becomes super, super tricky, because there are no local service providers who are going to help you. And you're sort of left to fend for yourself, and you don't have enough money, but you're committed to the process. So what we do is, we'll open accounts for people in the States. That's generally sort of the default, is to send your money to the States and invest in the States. Because that's the way to do it. It might be unfortunate, but that's pretty much the only way to do it. There are some people who will work with you, or there are some products out there that will sort of allow you to invest in your local currency locally, but they're few and far between. For most people, the solution, again, outside monies they might be putting away into a pension plan, which is okay. But if they want to go above and beyond, they're going to pretty much have to move their money back to the States to invest. And, you know, it is what it is. You know, we can criticize it all we want, but the fact of the matter is that is the game right now, and those are the rules. And, you know, to avoid prohibitively high taxation, which will ultimately sort of derail even the best of intentions, right? You can start out and do everything by the book, but if you're paying 44% or whatever the number is in tax, and you have to pay it every year because they're marking to market, all these kinds of things, at the end of the day, there's nothing left, so you're sort of forced to move it.
It's somewhere between difficult and impossible.
Basically.
But what I find on this is, I mean, you know, we can sit here and we can talk logically about solutions, right? But what I am finding, and sort of, you know, I've been in this sort of dealing with this problem with people for a number of years. And what I find is that psychologically, a lot of Americans have just given up. You know, they just say, I'm an American, I'm disabled, I can't do anything. And, you know, this is a difficult problem to turn around, I think, isn't it? Because it's always more comfortable to not do anything, right? And sort of, oh my God, I'm an American, I can't do anything. But a voice inside their head is always saying, thank God I'm an American, I'm no longer obligated to do anything because I can't, because I'm disabled, because I'm American. I mean, how do you deal with that problem? I mean, it's not articulated, right? But there's a certain, I think, psychological undertone to that. Do you find that?
Yeah. People, to say that people get frustrated is, you know, there might be children watching this, so I don't want to, I'll keep to the word frustrated, but it's like you say, it's hard to, people feel defeated, right? Because everywhere you turn, I personally had an issue with my own taxes. I don't want to get into it, obviously, but with my own taxes, my accountant came up with something, and I'm like, wait a second, if that's the case, then I can't do X, Y, and Z. And then, or if I do, I'm actually going to lose money because I'm going to pay more in taxes than I can ever make in profits. And I was like, what? And this happened yesterday, and I was like, it sure stinks. It just stinks. I said out loud, it stinks to be an American and own your own business abroad. That's what I said. And you know, you have to keep, like, just like we were talking about before, trying to get ahead, you have to keep pushing. You can't let it get you down, or you're not going to get ahead. And the rules are what the rules are, but you know, there are those who, you know, who will choose to give up citizenship. But like you said, for the people who say, well, I like being an American, that's not necessarily an option, and there are costs involved with that as well. So there's no perfect solution, that's for sure. And just as an aside, that I thought about from the last question, there's another big issue that, you know, a lot, as we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people retire abroad. That's like been a big thing. They come to Israel, retire, they go to Panama, they go to Europe, you know, Latin America. It's a trend, right? The people, especially, you know, in the early years, at least of retirement, they want to go see the world, and they'll spend 10 years living abroad. And what they don't know is when the other big issue for an American being abroad is not so easy to access your money that's in the States. You might be able to use your credit card, but if you need, you know, a chunk of money, more than your living expenses, let's say you want to buy a property, or let's say you think the dollar is, you know, is sinking, and your host country has a strong currency, and you want to move money into that currency because you're living there, right? You don't want to lose money because of the currency issues. A lot of the firms won't transfer money abroad. A lot of the banks won't transfer money abroad. The brokerage firms won't transfer money abroad unless you show documentation. Now, people come to me and say, well, what do you mean it's my money? Why do I have to show documentation? I'm buying a car, I'm buying an apartment. It's my, you know, why won't they let me have my money? And I'm like, well, you know, they won't until you show documentation that you're buying an apartment, or you're, you know, they want to see the receipt from the car, all these different things. For you to access your own money. People, that's like the biggest shock, I think, for
That's
people who
crazy.
retire abroad. Huge shock.
You know, that's interesting because that's a problem that I haven't heard of being in Canada. All right, maybe it's just because it's, I mean, Toronto is south of parts of the United States, right?
Right.
But I have heard, this is the second time I've heard this problem from somebody in Israel, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, to me, that just is incredible. I mean,
But it's a problem if you're retiring to Europe, you're pretty much everywhere except for Canada. Maybe if you're going to Mexico or, I don't know. But once you cross the ocean, it's a huge issue. And a lot of banks, big banks, names that you would know, they won't do any kind of wire transfer. They just won't do the wire, they won't do the electronic transfer for you. Here, like we do it, but we'll ask for documentation. So it makes things a little bit more difficult for people to even, like I say, to access their money is not always larger sums, right? If you need $1,000 so you can use your credit card or whatever, but if you need a chunk of change for a real expense, it's not so easy to access it. You have to give yourself a little more time because there are processes that are involved.
and you're able to help people with that?
We help people with that, but I'll tell you something else. Because of all the fear amongst foreign banks of dealing with Americans, at least here, but I'm pretty sure it's the same with European banks. The local Israeli banks, when the money comes in, let's say our firm will free up the money. You provided the documentation, we'll send the money. Then the receiving bank in Israel all of a sudden says, whoa, where's this money from? Did you pay taxes on this money? Were you laundering this money?
They actually
you've got to go through hoops. You've got to get an accountant to write a letter for you. You might have a lawyer will write a letter. We'll write a form letter for you that you had an account in good standing with us. It's complicated to actually access your own money. If everything's legit and you paid your taxes and you go through the process, you'll get your money. But I know cases of people who didn't and were stuck because they had a lot of money abroad and then no way of accessing it. And they needed like $100,000, $150,000. That's something they can, use their credit card and take it out of the ATM machine. And they were stuck. They had nothing to do other than come clean, ultimately.
Yeah, so that's a problem for the expat community, not so much for people who live their lives outside
Right.
the United States. But man, that's another real horror story. U.S. citizenship is very complicated. In 1996, James Dale Davidson wrote this book called The Sovereign Individual. And this is in 1996. And he made a prediction that American citizenship was going to be the biggest problem in the 21st century for people, precisely because of these rules. And boy, was he right.
Right.
No question about it. Okay. Well, this has been an incredibly interesting conversation. What would you like to add? What if this were reversed? What would you ask yourself?
There's another issue that people should know about also. It's what they called accidental Americans.
Oh,
right?
yeah, I've heard of those.
You've heard of those, right? Those are the ones who are really like, they didn't choose anything. They just happened to be born to American parents and they live wherever they live and they're American citizens. And, through no fault of their own, all of a sudden they're thrown into this mess. They really have an issue because they have no connection whatsoever to the United States and the local banks won't deal with them. And, that's another issue. I mean, it might be, that's a talk on of itself, but it's an issue that people who move abroad should realize that they're setting their kids up for complicated adulthood. And that's where you come in, right? Where a lot of those people are giving up citizenship for sure.
Oh, you know what, Aaron? I don't think they have a choice.
Yeah.
It's not, every human being on the planet has their own set of issues. Okay. And there's, life is not perfect. Everybody has problems, but for different groups of people, I mean, everybody has to ask really, which set of problems would you most rather deal with in life, right? I mean, you can't say I can get rid of these things, but And for the people who have no connection to the United States, it is really, really, really difficult to make a case for retaining US citizenship. That's of course very different for somebody like you who grew up there, or these, expats, etc. But it's very, very different headspace. There's no question about it. I mean, why do you, I realize this is moving a little bit beyond the scope of our initial discussion, but why does the US continue this insanity? What's the point of it? Do you have any theories on that?
I have no, well, you know what? They want, it's another revenue source, I guess. That's all I can think of. I don't know why. It makes, they're the only country in the world pretty much that has these sort of draconian laws and codes. And again, it's not particularly fair. Here in Israel especially, you have plenty of accidental Americans who don't speak any English. They don't speak English. They wouldn't know how to call the United States, and they're stuck having to pay US taxes. It may, and not getting served. Nobody will work with them locally. It's absurd. It's really, really absurd. But that's the situation. You got to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. This is so familiar to you and to me and to others who've, seen it firsthand, both personally and vicariously, But my view of this is I don't think that, this is hard enough to understand if you actually have to deal with it, but I don't think that any policymakers in the United States even understand what this issue is. Would you agree with that?
You hit the nail on the head. I think that's the biggest issue. That's one of the reasons that nothing really has been done, is because nobody has, of the 538, people in in Congress, in the Senate, nobody has these issues. And until you actually live it, you can't understand how preposterous it actually is.
I think that's right. I had a very interesting experience a couple of weeks ago. I was researching a tax treaty issue, actually, and I found an article written by a law professor in the US. And I reached out to him, and we had a little bit of back and forth, and I explained how difficult the whole situation was for Americans abroad. And his response to me was interesting. I didn't expect him to be particularly interested in it, but his response was interesting. He said, that's so odd because, tax rates have never been lower in my life in the United States. Like, completely missing the point. It's not the rate of tax, it's the method of tax.
Right.
That's the problem. But I learned something from that because, this is a very incredibly nice man who really went out of his way to find something for me in a library, sent it over. And, actually asked me about this a little bit. And I just sent a paragraph, I didn't want to overwhelm on the issue, but, clearly, unless you know anything about it, I think you tend to see this in simple terms like tax rates or something. It has nothing to do with the issue at all.
Right. Nothing at all.
Yeah, it's the methodology of it that's the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
This has been a very, very interesting discussion, and I am very glad that I reached out to you because I think that this is a podcast that people might learn something from. So, in closing here, how would people get in touch with you?
So they can. I'm pretty out there on social media. You can get to me on my website at aaronkatzman.com. That's AARONKATSMAN. And that name, Aaron Katzman, you can find me on, you can sign up for my YouTube channel where I have all kinds of videos and podcasts, and go from there. Facebook, same thing.
All right, that's great. And again, I'm speaking with Aaron Katzman in Jerusalem, Israel. And thanks so much for your insights. I leave this podcast feeling motivated.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.